Welcome to the AI Transition Podcast, where we navigate the human side of change and explore one of the biggest transitions in human history. I'm your co host, Christiana. I'm a transition expert and organizational leadership coach.
And I'm Stephen, your co-host specializing in organizational change and leadership, particularly those that are brought on by rapid technological advances.
Today, we're going to cover some of the recent news in the AI transition space and our take on it.
And then we're going to take a deep dive into a topic that many people find difficult, that of endings. And we often focus on new beginnings, Christiane, but today we're going to
Mm.
explore more why endings are crucial and how to navigate them more effectively.
We absolutely will go into that. I think endings are something that is not discussed as much, especially in this moment in time when we are so focused on the future and embedding AI in so many organizations.
Absolutely, absolutely. But look, let's first off, let's overview a little bit of the transition news that has been out there. So look, for me, one of the big ones has been around DeepSeek and R1.
Yeah, it's an open source Chinese model, and from what I've seen, it's really disrupting the AI market itself. More can you tell me about it?
So look, this is potentially a real big shift in what's happening in the AI market overall. So this was, as you said, this was an open source model from a
Mm,
smallish Chinese company. Open source meaning basically they're giving it away. Anyone can now download and run this themselves if you've got
mm,
enough hardware sitting in your garage. And look, what that kind of means, people are still trying to work out, but this was worldwide news.
mm.
The Nvidia, who kind of provide the chips that power most of the big AI systems, their stock crashed 17% last week, and that was
Yeah.
600 billion US dollars. So, quite a big one. Look, there's a couple of aspects for this here. One is
Mm,
the kind of the geopolitical one, which I don't really want to go into too much just now, but potentially this transformation not being a USA led one, but potentially, there's multipolar and the likes of China's involved heavily with this as well. But
mm.
maybe even the open source side thing is bigger because what it does mean is that, in the not too distant future, you could have your own R2D2 sitting in your garage, right?
Or your own 3PO, making you tea or something like that. So, yeah, where could this go? I also think it's really interesting you're talking about the worldwide news around Nvidia stock crashing, and so not just having the transformation and transition space that we talk about in terms of the human impact, but also the financial impact to the world economy and how
Yeah,
all this is disrupting a lot of areas.
absolutely. And you'd one roundabout literature and authorship, Christiane.
Yes, so I'm a total book nerd. I'm a huge reader. I've got thousands of Kindle books and I've got thousands of book books, as in physical books. And so the news is here that the American Authors Guild has launched a human authored initiative, so that there is ability to distinguish between an AI written book and a book written by a human, and having a sticker on there to say this book was written by a human and not by AI. And I found that just fascinating. And in the context of, I hang on out on Facebook every now and then, watching videos that, are quite emotive and quite wonderful about animal rescues and so forth. And people are saying these are not real, these are AI. So it's even
Yeah.
really difficult to distinguish those things. And so what I think they're really trying to ensure is that human connection, maybe the human creativity that is in literature, it's written by someone's art, I suppose that I would say,
Yeah.
and someone's imagination and creativity. And so being able to have that choice and know where the book source is coming from, I think is really important.
I think, look, that one's going to really play out. And look, as a bit of an aside to that one, I heard somebody from more the tech space talking about how maybe in the future you might have the equivalent of Etsy, but for programmers to say that this has been programmed by a human, not programmed by an AI. Whether we will
Mhm.
buy computer programs that are just done by humans rather than AI, maybe not. But this, I
Yeah.
think, has a lot of legs, right? Of honoring that craft, that
Mm.
experience.
Yes.
This
Yep.
one's got a lot of legs.
It does, and I think that comes to the next item that you're going to talk about is around the ethical guidelines from the Vatican. So here is now the Catholic Church getting involved in all of this, and that's incredible. So it spans all areas
Yeah.
of the world, right? It spans religion. It impacts everyone everywhere, and that's just fascinating about it. So what can you tell me about that?
So, like, I think when you've got the Pope weighing in, with and issuing guidelines as well, you know that this has kind of stepped way outside of the tech space here.
It
Look,
is.
there's a lot of really interesting stuff in here, particularly around kind of automated weapon systems. So this is basically
Mm,
drones that are AI operated that can then make their own decisions, to who to target, who to kill. Right at the
mhm.
moment, there's humans in the loop for a lot of that, but for maybe not much longer. There's the ethical side of this transition
Yes,
is massive, right? And
it
you know,
is.
we've just shown just a couple of examples there across, deep seeking what's happening geopolitically, with the Chinese. We've got, maybe more at the micro level about, that your own impact with human authorship and what that means.
Mm,
And then you've got
mm.
the full-on ethical guidelines coming from the Pope. I mean, there's quite a broad sweep here.
It is, and when I think about it, it's also what is AI created by? It is created by imperfect humans. So, are we
Yeah.
expecting AI to behave in an ethical manner when I suppose our own, own biases come in when we are creating content or data or information that we're feeding to the AI and training it on? So that there needs to be an ethical part of this really quite deeply worldwide. And good on for the Vatican for stepping up for that.
Yeah, and that ethical part of it, that kind of touches back on that deep steak story as well, because on the one
Mm,
hand, you've got potentially other players now, instead of just kind of the five big American companies who are going to define what AI is and whatever ethics that, the likes of, Musk and Zuckerberg and Gates and the rest of it decides, that we should follow.
yeah.
But potentially on the other side, do we really want China defining those as well?
Mm.
But if it's open source, does that mean that it's a much more multipolar of where that goes? So there's a lot
Anyway,
playing
really.
out just now. Yeah,
Yeah, very much, very much. And we're going to keep covering those news every time we launch our podcast and talk about the show because we think these are really important topics to always bring up because they are really
absolutely.
affecting the human side of change and who we are on the planet.
Yes.
Let's,
But so let's take a deeper dive,
mm,
Christiane. And we said we'd talk about endings.
we are. We want to talk about endings, but I think it's worthwhile to give our listeners an opportunity to understand the whole model. And we're going to cover that really briefly now. So the three key phases of the transition and outlined here. So we've got the ending, and we're going to deep dive into that today. So this is where you let go of the old ways, where the old ways no longer serve you. It involves dealing with losses. It involves dealing with letting go. And then you've got the neutral zone, and there's another word for it, which I kind of like, is the messy middle, where things are
Yeah,
just in between. Like I think when I think about the kids, the monkey bars, you're holding onto one, and then you're trying to grab the other, and there's a transition in between where you might not be holding onto anything, or just one hand is holding on, and then you go and take the next step. So the old life is no longer available, and the new one isn't fully operational, and that can create quite a lot of, I suppose, stress for people because there's lots of uncertainty in the messy middle. It's a period of psychological realignment. And then we've got the
yeah,
new beginnings, which is what people kind of really love and we kind of used to go to. Then you get the new identity, new sense of purpose, a fresh start, a clean slate. It is something that people find much more easier to take and to adopt to emotionally, at least once they've gone through all the phases. But today we
yeah.
really want to go crucially to endings.
No, and I think that's really important because a lot of the work that we do and the organizations and the people that we work with, and what we're seeing kind of worldwide, people just
Mm,
want to go to the new beginning,
mm,
and missing out that ending period, and even that messy middle as well of well,
mhm.
what's going to come next. It's a lot easier for you to just jump to that new thing, but you've got all of that baggage of the other stuff that's still there.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, definitely. And we talked about that in our last episode too, just around change fatigue and around people being constantly in the messy middle because we've got lots of new beginnings, but not enough endings and not enough acknowledging those endings.
Yeah, and it's it is a phase that's often overlooked, right?
Yeah.
And as the saying goes, every beginning is a consequence, and every beginning ends something. And it's probably the thing that hit home with me most when we were doing recently the transition
Hmm.
work that we went through, that really focusing on doing and honoring that ending first. But
Yes.
most people don't really like endings, Christiane.
They don't, and I think it's because a lot of your identity is caught up in the moment, in that who you are. And I was wondering about you, and you've been in Australia for quite some time, and you're originally from Glasgow, so I've outed you now, and you still
Thank you.
got your Scottish accent. Where is your ending? Whatever happened that you're
Uh,
still holding on to that Scottish identity as tightly as possible?
Look, in some respects, some things are harder to give up than others. It has to be
Yeah,
said.
yeah.
And this is one that I haven't got as much of a hold on. Look, I would also say that your German accent is peeking through there, Christiane, as well.
How dare you? People think I'm South African for some strange reason. I think, maybe what we want to acknowledge there is that it's okay in endings to
Yeah.
retain things. We don't have to give up everything. It's not about like chucking everything out. It's about what are specific the things that we need to end to move forward because they're no longer servers and, Scottish accents
Well,
uh, can
although
stay, as far as I say.
well, even with that one though,
Yeah,
in some respects, I'm in a bit of a messy middle because the accent
right.
has changed, right?
I
And
has, yeah.
so when I do go back to Scotland, there's usually a couple of days where my good friends, I metaphorically slap me around a little bit for
They'll rake you.
for some of the things that I'm saying, and
Yeah.
I'm trying to hold the line in my own household.
Ah.
I know what pants and trousers are, but Australians don't seem to kind of get that right, and so even from a word point of view, but I feel like in a bit of a messy middle to be honest as well. But
All right.
look, that is one that I'm going to find hard to give up fully.
Yes. And you probably don't have to. You probably don't have to. Well, let's talk and dive into endings. Why are they so difficult? And what is it that we need to do to make sure that endings are properly acknowledged? I think that's one of the ones that's really key.
Mm,
So
yeah.
recognizing, addressing those losses and being empathetic about it. I think in organizations we gloss over that. And people sometimes don't feel like they have the space to talk about what actually isn't not what they're going to lose. And so ignoring the losses really creates that resistance because you're not really hearing me and you're not really seeing me and what I'm losing. And I think that's a crucial one that endings have to be acknowledged.
And I think, in our personal lives and people's personal lives that there's more of a tradition of that. So for example, there's funerals, there's wakes, there's if we're going for the
Mm-hmm.
really big ones, right? There's properly recognizing, addressing, taking that moment. People might not want to do it, but
Mm-hmm.
you go through it and you go through it for a reason. And that's as true with that, really big heavy stuff, or your team's lost the cup final and they lost the last minute. Again, not that I'm bringing back my whole Scottish Dundee United thing and the trauma that I've still got for losing
I'm
things
so
like
not into
that,
sports,
right?
so no sympathy for me on that one. So,
But again, that was endings, and even though I
yes,
might want to ignore it entirely, they're
yeah.
going to the pub afterwards, they're talking about it, they're having to read the obituary of your team that's now finished and that sort of stuff.
Mm.
Um, I think addressing that openly, what we see missed all the time is that just doesn't really happen within
Mm.
organizations.
Yeah, and I think you really tying into how many emotions come up when there's endings, the grief and the sadness and the fear or confusion, and how we like haven't got as much skills, I think, generally in society to deal with endings well, or have rituals and ways of ending, especially in the Western society where we acknowledge that. So people sit with these emotions, and then what?
Mm,
So again, going back to what I mentioned earlier, we need to acknowledge them because we know they're there regardless. So even people might put up a front, or they might appear to be kind of being present to the new thing, but internally that they probably feel very unseen and quite triggered.
I think triggered is the word there, to be honest.
Mm, mm,
That's those quite potentially extreme emotions, the grief, sadness, fear, confusion, right? And these are normal, right? I,
yeah.
I think we've seen leaders in the past, who see that as signs of bad morale and stuff. But
Mm.
but from my point of view, these are completely normal reactions to what's going on.
They are. And when you work with teams or work within organizations, I always go like, listen to the black hat. Listen to the person who
Yeah.
holds that space, right? And who is angry or is
Yep.
confused or asks the uncomfortable questions. And how you respond to that person shows you the capacity of the organization to handle change. And that's a skill that needs to be built.
Yeah, when we were doing our ORSC work, the organizational
Yes,
relationship systems coaching,
yes,
it's those voices on the fringes. That's the ones
yes,
that probably are the ones that are really telling you what's going on.
yeah,
The what the pack is telling you, where everyone's all trying to kind of fit in with each other.
yeah.
There's some information in there, but you're probably going to get the real information of the stuff that's happening on the edges.
And I want to dive into that because you brought that up. I remember one of the things that was really quite impactful to me was when you have this model of going over the edge from the old to the new reality, you have to cross that edge. And so there's an ending, and then there's a messy middle, and then there's a new beginning. And so the less you acknowledge the ending, the less people who are the black hats or the
Mm,
truth tellers are heard. It actually also means that the people who are already on the other side and have kind of accepted a new beginning, they might go back to to side with that person who's been marginalized because they say, well, what happens next time when I don't get hurt? And so I think it's really important that there's an acknowledgement and leaning into that those changes and those feelings that people have, because you'll lose a bunch of people along the way otherwise.
yeah.
Mm.
Maybe if we start kind of shifting into how do we cope with this then?
Yeah,
And
totally.
we can talk more broadly, but also let's tie that back to this big transition, this external transition that's impacting or going to impact everyone.
Yes.
How
I think I
how
want to
how do we cope?
how do we cope? I think one thing we do need to actually realize is that it's going to happen anyway. So part of endings is actually to let
Mm,
go of the old reality and identity. So there's actual work that needs to happen. You can't just sit there and go, I've got all my grief and loss. Also, there needs to be some active work done that we can sort of support people to embrace that change. So let's have a look at how do we cope? How do we cope? How do we move through this? What do you think we want to start with?
yes. And how about marking those? It's difficult within an organization, but
Yeah.
as I said before, the organizations don't really want to mark the ending of those things. Maybe
Mm,
because it's quite uncomfortable, because you might actually have to review of, you know, whether that was actually good, what you were doing before, and there's maybe some uncomfortable questions, or there's all sorts of reasons. But
mm.
those, I've rarely seen anything that has marked that ending. We've read about some stuff, but I personally have never seen anything in an organization.
Yeah, I'm deeply thinking and coming up with very little, which tells me that as well.
Yeah.
Having done a recent transformation, certainly looked into what happened in the past and how had you started new things. But I suppose the conversation could have been much better to say how were the things ending and what is this going to inform us now. So I think this is a really underutilized skill and capability
Yeah.
in organizations.
Do you know actually one thing that did pop up for me there, one area where it does happen
Mhm.
is the leaving do, where somebody's
Yeah.
leaving,
Oh, that's
right?
yes, yes.
Right.
Celebrate that
So
properly. Yeah,
so there's a symbolic one, right? Where
yeah,
and all sorts of stuff, as we know, usually comes out in those
yes,
sorts of
yeah,
nights where you get a lot of truth. And there was an amazing GM that I worked for a couple of years ago, who actually sat me down at the very beginning of it and saying, look, I know this beginning part is really important, but actually with people coming into the organization, but it's just as important, if not more important, how we manage people who are leaving the organization. And it's the only
mm,
GM who's ever sat me down and had that conversation. Everyone else, it's about how people are coming in. When they're going out, it's like
yeah,
they didn't exist anymore. It's
yes,
literally
yes. It
they're
is.
deleted from the system. They are
Yeah,
gone.
very quickly too. Yeah, I mean, I had to let go of a lot of my team last year when I was working in a leadership role. And what was really important for me is that there was cards and a lunch or a dinner, an acknowledgement of that person's contribution and their greatness as well to who they were. And I think it's really important to have a good ending. And
Yeah.
to close the chapter. It's a ritual. So more of that is good. And I think it's not just people leaving the organization, it's people who might be losing something. And so when we talk about endings, we need to understand what specifically is an organization, a team, or a person losing. What professional loss is there? What personal loss is there? So
Yeah.
what is ending for people? So there needs to be some work into that and actually going, what do I need to learn about the loss? And be really quite diligent about that.
I, I,
And yeah, go ahead.
So I was going to say, there's different levels of losses, I think.
Mm,
There's the specific stuff, right? And if we bring this back to, potentially what's happening with AI,
mm,
it might be whole roles, right? But it might be part of
yes.
roles, at least initially, right? So
Yep.
so recognizing that loss is occurring, I think is really crucial.
It is. And I read an article around the OpenAI tools for research and
Mhm.
research assistants. So at the moment, you
Yep.
have been research assistants for proper roles. So creating highly specialized assistants in the medical field or in the legal field as well, and training them on that is to replace or augment. It's
Yeah.
called augment for the start of it. Research assistant type roles. So that'll
Yep.
make things more efficient. And we talk always about this is that sort of new beginning, I suppose, going there, decision making, efficiency, it's going to be better this way. But I'm yet to see an article that talks about what people are going to lose for that.
I was literally reading a couple of articles yesterday about the deep research stuff that's just come out from OpenAI, where it's the beginning of this, what they're calling it agentic behavior, where you're setting up these agents that will go off, trawl the web for 5, 10, 15 minutes, do quite complicated things, synthesize lots of different areas, doing the whole research,
Mm-hmm.
then bring it back, synthesize it, create the presentation, create the findings, etc.
Mm,
uh, which is amazing, right? Which
mm,
means that there's potentially all sorts of new discoveries and new research that's going to happen and push the bounds of science forward, etc.
yeah.
However,
I was waiting for the but. I was waiting for the
however,
but. It's
right?
got to be a
However,
but.
right? There's especially entry level roles, and we've got
Yes,
kids who are
we do.
entering the workplace. What does it mean for those sorts of roles then?
Mm.
But also, the specific loss of the people who are in those roles just now. What does that mean?
Yes. And when you start in a career, usually you do those grunty roles. You do those, research or data-driven or detailed roles that now AI can take over. So I'm also wondering, and I think we should bring that into the next few podcasts, is around what's happening in universities around AI in terms of education, not just in terms of the learning, but also what are people being taught about how their roles might be augmented. So it's another
Yes.
conversation to be had.
Look, to be honest, there's probably a whole separate podcast just of what's happening in the education sector, right? Because
I
that's
think so.
happening
Yes.
so
So
fast,
fast. Yes.
of what's going on there. So
Yeah.
there's those specific losses, but there's also potentially subjective losses that are there as well, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where there's if we go with subjective and objective, there's tangible things of things might lose money or the job and the rest of it, but there's subjective of what people will feel that they're losing as well for them personally.
Yes, and we talked about that earlier around the authors maybe have been replaced by AI books, and AI actually writes some really good adventurous stories and does the arc really well. So, what's the status and the importance of an author and their creative spirit that comes with that? That is quite subjective, but it's also very much around, I suppose, that person's calling and what they
Yeah.
they want out of life and their status as an author. So there is subjective losses, and so what the treatment here is to don't argue with what people feel, even if it's not real in your terms. It's not like it's a role
Yep.
title change or something. Make sure that you listen and learn and don't dismiss or debate their experience or gloss over it. And I think that's a really key one here through all of what we just talked about in terms of how do you actually work with endings. It's about listening and presence and empathy and being very open to all the different opinions and emotions and feelings that are coming up.
I think status is going to be a massive one
Yeah.
in the years ahead. We've been conditioned our whole lives, and the societies are all set up around these
Mm.
the roles, your job, And in certain cultures, it's even more profound as well.
This.
The role that you do, that is your status, the way that you interact with people, the friends that you have. Um, you, these losses or these changes, and you're absolutely right. You might look from the outside and go, well, that's not quite true. You're not quite losing that. But I agree with you not to argue around what people are feeling because they
Mm,
are absolutely feeling that.
mm. Yep, they totally do. And there is, as you're thinking, like talking about the different cultures where the identity is much tighter tied to your job title, your status, your sense of power, your sense of your income. All of that really ties into it. So globally, and this is why we keep talking and about these topics and why they're so poignant, is because it is a revolution worldwide. The
Mm.
AI will transform how we work, how we see ourselves, and everything around that. And so we think it's worthwhile to continue to unpack that. Let's go to the last losses, symbolic losses. What do you think they are?
I look at times they also manifest themselves in complete overreactions, right? So
Mm,
you might lose or think that you've lost out on something, and it could be small. It could be that you no longer do one part of your role, and it might only be
mm,
a really small part of it, but that's the symbolic part of it that you tied a lot of identity to.
yeah.
Usually it's tied to something else.
Mm,
There's a bigger result, bigger loss that's happened elsewhere. Um, but that's when we talked about the emotions that we might see during these periods. Some of the you might feel that these are overreactions, but this is kind of quite natural stuff that happens.
it's part of the history, right? So something happened in the past, some other loss in the organization, something happened that didn't get resolved. The ending didn't get resolved. There was no messy middle, and so people
Yeah.
are still carrying that resentment or that trigger with them. And then something else happens that seemingly looks quite small, but ends up being the big thing that really just gets everyone up in arms because it's about the legacy of the organization. So important, I suppose, when we are
Yeah.
looking at working in transitions and transformations, it's not just look ahead, but also look back.
Yeah.
What is the baggage?
And kind of tying this back to the beginning about how people usually
Mm,
skip over this entirely. So what I have seen, what I have done as well, to be honest, in the past, is
hmm.
that you skip forward even beyond the messy middle and you think the new beginning and you just dive in there.
Yeah,
But you carry this baggage. You haven't
yeah,
went through that process of doing the ending. And what I've seen, probably the main emotion that I've seen there is anger. It's that sort of
yes.
it's that seething, just nebulous resentment and anger. It's so unfair, right? What
Mm,
that actually is, it's hard to pin down, but there's just that feeling that's there. And potentially that's what's there, not just an individual, but more on a broader societal wise just now, because we're not good at this ending stuff.
no, we're not good at facing into anger either. And so when I
Yeah.
think about some of the trainings I did and change management stuff I did in the last few years, there were some people who were really really angry and quite, as you said, quite disproportionate to what was
Mm.
happening, or it felt quite disproportionate. So really being able to understand that they might be a representation of collective anger that is held in the organization, or of that unacknowledged thing that happened 4 years ago with that person, that leader, that change that
Yep.
still is in the spirit of it all. And
Yeah.
so I think what we need to acknowledge and understand to make this AI transition work is around what are people losing. Let's do endings well with this one. Let's really lean into some of those really messy, big emotions that come up for people and be okay with them being there. I think that's really the core thing here is we,
Mhm.
we need to build the capacity for big disturbing emotions to be present and not try and fix them, but work with them.
Oh, people are not going to like this, Christiane.
No,
They're not going to be
well,
happy.
no, they're not. And you know what? I totally agree with that. I was
Yeah.
terrified of anger and conflict years and years ago. And it's only when we did our systems coaching training
Yeah.
together, like it's 2018, 2019, I
Yeah.
lent into that. It is a deliberate action. You can't
Yeah.
just do anger well. I don't do anger well or conflict, but it's something that you need to learn. It's a skill to build, and anyone can learn that skill. So let's bring it back to AI, I suppose, in terms of adoption. What else comes up for you when you hear this as we're seeing out this podcast?
So I think we've already kind of covered it a little bit there about just how hard this is going to be
Mm,
because the maybe the other thing that we didn't quite mention here, but one of the big ch challenges that I'm seeing with this is going to potentially happen so fast that
mm,
the ability to be able to stop and do that ending might not be there because the new beginning is here before you've had the
mm,
chance to go through any of this. You know,
mm.
we've done a lot of work in the past on your previous revolutions and stuff that's happened, you're
Yep.
going all the way back to, when the telephone was invented, and there was
You were there when
decades
the
for
telephone was
society,
invented.
right? So,
So when you
right,
said we, I thought you meant us. And no,
well,
talk
we
about the
didn't know.
telephone.
So, but you know what I mean. You know what I mean, right? And the radio, and and it
Yes.
took a number of,
TV.
and then the TV, right? And
Yes.
then we're getting onto the internet and the rest of it.
Yep.
And that time scale has just been getting shorter and shorter and shorter. So one of the
Yep.
big challenges here with this is that when I started really getting into AI again properly, a couple of years ago, they were talking about AGI, which is artificial general intelligence. That was
Mm,
mid 30s, early 40s. We had maybe 10, 15, 20 years. And,
mm,
it's coming and it's going to be huge, etc. A lot of the consensus is now playing out that this is 2027, right? Which is going to
mm.
be 2 and a bit years. If
Yep.
that's the case, the the chance to stop and do this is going to be really hard. So what is going to happen, I think, a lot of places, is that the new beginnings will just happen,
Mm.
and then we're going to be dealing with all the stuff that we just talked about there, of
We
all of
will.
that unresolved part. Um,
Yes.
that's going to be
And
so hard.
it's going to be hard, but also there's a system to it. There's very clear
It's
ways
true.
of doing endings well, right? And so even if you have to mop it up, I think as something that I learned really in my executive coaching, you can always recontract. You can always go back and fix the past. Like you can't fix the past, but you can fix the present, and you can go and lean into that. So I think there's always opportunity to rebuild trust and to acknowledge those endings and have a system that helps you with that. I think that's really key for me. The past is gone. You just have to look into the future, but the mess is still there. And I think you can fix it. You can work through it. If you're willing, and it's going to happen.
Do you know, before I say anything else, I think we should finish on the happy, positive note that you usually
Yeah.
bring to these things, Christiane. Um,
Yes. So start. Let's finish with a high. You can do it.
exactly.
And not in the American way. That is very motivational. But yeah, I think we can do it.
Yeah.
So
So let's wrap this week's episode up just now. Next week we'll probably start talking about the messy middle and how
yes,
we
we will.
how we dive into that. But I just want to thank everyone for tuning in to the AI Transition podcast. If you enjoyed the conversation, please subscribe to the podcast. It really makes a huge difference to us. Leave us a rating and share it with somebody who'd love it.
Mm.
Your support really helps us reach more listeners and will help us create more better content.